Maybe first of all, Frederik, thank you very much for joining this conversation. I'm super excited because we haven't met in person and we haven't even met virtually. So we just had this chat on LinkedIn. And I saw that you are teaching software engineers, software developers how to be better coders.
At least I'm trying to.
Yeah, it makes me a bit laughing because I know that software developers, they prefer to call themselves engineers instead of coders. Coders has sometimes negative meaning that, okay, you are the coder, so you're just writing the code. And software engineer means that you are solving the problem. So you think like an engineer very deeply. So you have the analysis and so on. But before we go into your topic, first of all, how did it start? Your adventure with teaching developers. Could you just give me a little bit of background? Where did it start? When did it start? And why do you do it? Why do you like it actually?
Yeah, so actually it goes way back and mostly from personal experience. As when I started programming, I was like 16 years old or something like that. So I didn't have any formal education on how to actually approach programming. So what actually happened was that I started building a project, which was a web CMS system, and I ended up rewriting it 10 or 15 times to actually get it to a point where I could say I think it was okay. And even then, I could see as it grew larger, it became unmanageable, full of errors that I couldn't really control the process. So out of that frustration, I kind of got started on a path to learn more about how do we actually build better software. And that took me a lot of time reading and talking to people and seeing different videos from some of the great minds in software. And then I really is on the bandwagon of pay it forward. So I don't want anybody else to go through that process if we can kind of speed it up. So that's kind of the background I come from, that I want to take some of all of the time I've spent learning stuff and give it back to the community because I see a big need for just being able to write better code.
So how big is the community currently? I mean, do you do individual lessons or do you do some group lessons? How does it look like in practice right now?
So in practice, it's mostly a part of where I've been working. So actually having a public community is a really new thing. So I only started like half a year ago, trying to push it into the public. So the community is really not that existing right now. So I hope it will grow. I at least get some good feedback from people.
Okay, so tell me, what are the best code principles or practices you think should be applied right now? And because as you said, the teaching idea comes from the need. So you see that there is some pain or people are writing wrong code. So what, in your opinion, is the worst people do right now and why they need those improvements or the education? What's your experience in that area?
My experience is that when I talk to people and when I see people program, then there's a high focus on the fact that technology is changing very, very rapidly. And while I think that's true, I think there is a tendency to forget that on the most basic level of programming, it doesn't really change that much. We have had functional programming, object-oriented programming, but it hasn't really developed since the 70s. Our tools have become extremely much more powerful. We have an exponential increase in processing power, and all of that is good. But our techniques for actually putting our ideas into code, they're the same as they've been for the last 50 years. But since that's so static, I think we can gain a lot from becoming really good at it, because it doesn't really expire. That knowledge is always applicable. But instead, I see a lot of people focusing on learning the next JavaScript framework, or how do we implement something using the newest .NET stack or something, instead of taking a step back and trying to see what are the general principles we can apply everywhere. So it's not like stuff like test-driven development is anything new. That's been in existence for almost 20 years, I think, and the concept's even older than that. But I still see a lot of places where people don't really apply it. And I think that's a big shame, because I think processes like test-driven development is actually a pretty nice tool to be able to hang a lot of the other principles on. So it's much easier to learn concepts like domain-driven design or solid principles if we have a solid process like test-driven development to kind of learn from. Because if we have a good foundation, I think it becomes much easier.
Mm-hmm. And how does it look like in the Danish education system? Because, for example, in Poland, I remember when I had my primary school, we were learning HTML 1.0. It was a very long time ago. But after all, you don't have IT lessons, at all. And I see that right now there's a huge need on the market for these competencies. Plus, everyone should understand how computer works. So I guess it's quite basic. And I know that you have very good tech universities in Aarhus in Denmark or in Copenhagen.
Yeah, we do.
How much? So sorry. How popular is the programming in Denmark right now, and is it the part of the standard education right now?
At least when I went to school, the basic schooling, there wasn't really anything about programming.
Okay.
But as far as I understand, that has picked up quite a lot. We have a concept for kids called coding pirates. I'm not sure if that's an international concept actually, where volunteers go and teach kids how to program in a funny way, like they use Arduino boards and stuff like that, and actually build something. So they can see with much more than just a console writing out text. They can see a physical object actually doing something.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
There's definitely some interest on putting that forward. But I think the biggest problem is not necessarily there. I think, to me, the biggest problem, in my experience, that's actually the universities. When I rewrote this initial project I had over and over again, that was before going into university. But I had an idea that of course, when I go to university, I'll become a much better programmer. Because why wouldn't I? I would learn a lot of stuff. I should become better. But that actually didn't happen, to my big disappointment. And it's not because you don't get a lot of computer science theory, because you do. And that's part of the issue, that it's very one-sided. So you come into university and then you learn all about time complexity and what are the principles of making sure your database is ACID compliant and all of these things about Turing machines and stuff like that, but it's on an extremely theoretical and abstract level. So they don't teach stuff like, how do you make sure that when you come together 100 people to develop a piece of software, how do you make sure that when I code something, I don't break your stuff? And how do we make sure that you don't have branching conflicts and all of these practicalities, which are a big part of actually doing anything with code? But they don't teach that at all, and I think that's a big gap.
So that's interesting.
I don't know how that is. I don't know how that's in Poland. If you have more practicalities in your education.
The same here. I always repeat that after so many years, finally someone at school could learn, personal finances, team management, such basic stuff, and programming, for example. Each kind of skill that is useful in adult's life. No one teaches that. You learn by mistakes or you learn from others, and school gives you so much theory and good ideas, but you don't apply them in the real life. So basically, instead of learning 20% of practical stuff, you are learning 100% of everything, and then you use 5% of that, and the missing 15 is still in your hands. So you have to learn by yourself, like again, managing personal finances or programming. And it didn't change in Poland that much. We also have those campuses for little kids learning programming. There are also lessons with Lego Mindstorm. This is interesting because you can somehow program those machines, and this is fine. because it's a fun and entertaining stuff for kids to do. So they learn basic code and they see how machines can move.
Yeah, exactly. It's a much more hands-on approach. I think that when I started programming, at least the coolest thing was to make stuff or text appear on a console. I don't think with people having smartphones and everything today, that would be very appealing for them to see a menu rendered in a console. I think stuff like Lego Mindstorm is much better.
Yeah, I mean, you have a physical stuff machine. You can first of all build it, and then you can control it with your code, which gives more fun. And I guess people learn by, first of all, curiosity, and secondly by having fun, by playing with those devices, because they're actually devices from blocks. I've been reading the book about Lego recently. It's super great story.
It's super nice.
Yeah, so how they decided to, first of all, focus on blocks as a main business unit. So basically that's one thing. But also on top of that, they knew that there is new era or new generation coming that will use internet and will require more interaction, but also physical. So they realized that there is this internet interaction. So you have your keyboard and all of kind of chats, TikToks, Instagrams, but still you're in front of your screen. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just want to build something tangible, touch it, and then play with the code so you can control it. So you feel like you're building your all Wall-E, some robot, something that you can get friends.
And I think it's impressive how they actually managed to combine the physical world with the virtual world, because I haven't seen any other good examples of that.
So if you say that education in universities or high schools isn't that practical, where do people learn programming in Denmark? Is it in practice, doing some startups, or how does it work after that? Imagine you graduate and your feeling is that, okay, I kind of know what is programming and I know some basic rules, yet I don't have experience. And what do you do next?
Then if you're very lucky, like I were, then you'll go work in a place where you have some colleagues who already learned by other means. And then when they do code review, they will point out where you're doing it wrong or where it can be improved. So for me, it's been very much learning by having, in a sense, mentors that has been able to point out where I could improve. But I also know that not everybody is that lucky. If you end up in a company where everybody doesn't know, then you're kind of on a downward spiral to bad quality, because how would you lift yourself from that? That's very difficult, and I've seen a couple of friends end up there that they needed to change to a different place because they couldn't really evolve from where they were because of the lack of knowledge.
How about self-education? Because, for example, if in Poland, I know that there are quite a lot of self-taught programmers because they just like programming. By nights, they like sitting with their friends and coding. So funny to say, most of them, they aren't from the educational background, but they are self-taught programmers because they just like it. How about Denmark? Is it popular to be self-taught programmer?
I think it is, yes. I think it's many people are self-taught. And I don't necessarily see it as someone having a formal education being better at programming than someone not having, because as I said previously, we are not really taught the practicalities of programming. So you need to pick that up on the side anyway. But when we talk about learning to program and doing that on the side, I think everybody needs to do that anyway. Sure. I think it's when I've been talking to people, I kind of relate it to doctors. When you go to the doctor, you don't want someone who just is there 8 to 5 and then goes home and does something else. Of course, you want your doctor to be the guy who picks up his medical journal and reads about the latest stuff such that you can get the best possible guidance. And I see programmers in kind of the same place. that even though a lot of our technology is not really evolving a lot, there's still a very big difference between picking a 5-year-old JavaScript framework and picking someone from last year. But if you don't continuously educate yourself on what stuff exists, then you won't be able to do the right things. So I think that's very important to do that all the time.
What would you recommend as a good resource for learning for programmers? I know there are tons of places, but your favorite ones, like I know I've been using FreeCode Camp while I was learning like basic stuff. It was a long time ago. It's open source project where you can learn many JavaScript and some backend. But do you know some good places which you would recommend?
Yeah, I would say it depends a lot on what you're trying to achieve. For me, it has primarily been books because it's a good medium for me to dig into. And then lately I've been focusing a lot more on some of the conferences which are focused on code, like the DDD conferences or and some of the other ones that are talking a lot more into the coding practices, where I think some other conferences are more related to technology stuff. And then a couple of years ago, my eyes were open for the competitive programming world, where I looked into HackerRank. I don't know if you know that site.
HackerRank, yeah, of course I do.
Yeah, it's not because I really went into competitive programming as such, but I think some of the challenges they have on the website is really interesting and actually really difficult, some of them. So it provides quite a challenge to figuring out how to do stuff.
Okay, interesting. Maybe last question. How can people find you, Frederik? If someone would love to be better at coding, where this person can find you and how you can help the person?
Yeah, so I would say find me on LinkedIn on my name, Frederik Banke, and we'll probably put a link somewhere to that.
Sure, definitely.
And then under the video. Yeah, and then I run a newsletter as well, where you can sign up on my webpage, which is frederikbanke.com, where I send out a newsletter every second week. So I'm not going to spam people too much. Well, and thanks for having me. That's been a pleasure.